Welcome to This Week, Next Week, GroupM's Business Intelligence podcast. I'm Kate Scott Dawkins.
I'm Jeff Foster.
And I'm Nidhi Shah.
Busy week this week, guys. I can't even quite wrap my head around it. Just insane. How are you guys feeling at the end of this week?
Yeah, I think my head is still spinning, and we only have one more day to go.
I think the good thing for me is the results have made me feel that I've forgotten the cold. So good.
Too busy to feel cold. Oh my goodness. I love it. So we've got a packed schedule today, lots to get through. We're going to start with some economics news from both sides of the pond, jump into some of the major media owners that reported this week, including Amazon, Disney, Fox, Snap, Spotify, and Pinterest. We've got some e-commerce coverage in terms of Shein and the US de minimis regulations, and then major advertisers as well. Let's not forget, we had luxury, CPG, and digital endemic advertisers reporting this week, all with things to say about advertising. So let's jump in. But before we get started, there's just a little thing happening this weekend. It's not like a major advertising event or anything. We have the
Super Bowl.
That's right. Did you guys watch any of the ads that have been pre-released already?
Yeah, I've seen a fair amount of them as they've been coming online.
Yeah, same.
Any favorites?
Well, I'm a sucker for nostalgia, so the When Harry Met Sally, Hellman's Mayo one sticks out and recreating the classic scene from the movie.
That was good. I'm in a comedic mood this year. I can tell because of all the ones I watched. The sort of some of the, not the over the top slapstick. I didn't quite get the Coffee Mate Tongues one. That weirded me out a little bit. But I loved Nate Bargatze in the Dash Pass commercials. He's one of my favorite stand-ups right now. So I really enjoyed that one. And then there were a couple of sentimental ones. I think both Lay's and Hims and Hers tapping into one of the things we talked about actually with This Year, Next Year is this kind of current era of distrust in incumbent government and in big brands and big companies. So I thought that was pretty smart. Let's jump into economics. We started the week. I don't know if you guys realize it was just Monday when we had tariff announcements that were and then weren't. Feels like ages ago already. But we had a look as a team about what impact that was likely to have on advertising. I think we did expect it, if they were to remain in place, potentially have a negative impact on global advertising growth. Kind of varying impacts by sector, right? So depending on, again, how much trade was crossing borders between Canada, Mexico, and China for various sectors. Obviously, fruits, vegetables, and nuts from Mexico, highly impacted. But as those tend to be lower margin businesses, most likely to pass on cost to consumers. Similar with auto, and then things that maybe have a lower or moderate impact around more of the services industry. Nidhi, I know you were looking into financial services, and then kind of mixed, but maybe more moderate impacts, entertainment. Jeff, you were saying, with the retaliatory tariffs potentially.
Right, that Canada could cease tax incentives for productions.
Yeah, I mean, overall retaliation is an interesting one. The US relies less on trade than other developed nations. So it's about 25% of US GDP versus more than 80 for Germany, which is a big number when I went and researched that this week. And China's at about 37%. So definitely varying degrees of impact. I think we'll hear more from Nidhi as well when we get into European economics around some of that potential impact as well. Should we jump into that?
Yeah, sounds good. I mean, we had the big announcement this week, much anticipated on Bank of England cutting the rates by 0.25 percentage points. And I think this really echoes the rate cut decision by the European Central Bank last week. And I kind of see this as a positive in this without tariff world, lower borrowing costs, creating a better environment for advertising and the economy, promoting growth and investment of businesses. We also saw euro area inflation at 2.5% this week, marginally up from the previous month, but still closer to central bank targets. And, this idea that without tariff world, at the moment as we stand at the point of this podcast, things could change rapidly, of course. We are entering 2025 with a slightly more stability. But of course, there is that risk of tariffs with, the US being the largest partner in terms of both goods and services for the UK and a lot of the European markets. So yeah, just keeping a close eye on that one really, and how that could impact growth and a lot of the sectors you mentioned, Kate.
We also had some economic news out of the US this week. Jeff, do you want to take us briefly through that?
Yeah, so just a few hours ago, we had the US unemployment figures that came out, and job additions were at 143,000, which was lower than expectations, and unemployment came in at 4%, which was slightly better. So a little bit of a mixed bag. I think, as the Fed looks down the road and their decision making, this will factor in, but this is the final jobs report under the old administration and part of the first jobs report for the new administration. So I think we saw a ways to go before we sort of see the impact of the new administration's policies. But again, just something to keep an eye on.
Great. More earnings. So many earnings. Let's jump in. I'm going to kick it off with Amazon, one of our top 5 global ad sellers. That was a good report for advertising from Amazon. It grew 18%, now at a $69 billion annualized run rate. For the quarter, 17.3 billion. And they did talk about streaming as a new significant source of advertising revenue. They finished the 3rd season of Thursday Night Football on Prime Video with a full season average of 13.2 million viewers, according to Nielsen. They said an increase of 11% over 2023. And I mean, it's been interesting. I don't know if you guys have seen this. I've started getting ads on Amazon where you can just hit OK on your remote to add something to your cart, which is actually a very simple kind of swish experience. Have you guys been served these ads yet? I'm not sure how widely it's being rolled out.
I have not gotten any of those yet on my Amazon app.
I'm special. No, it's great. It's very simple. It shows up. Of course, being in this industry, you have to test it out. So I added something to cart, went and looked straight away. It was in there. Pretty flawless process. And they are looking at non-endemic advertisers too. I saw one ad that was offering to send an email, right? Instead of an add to cart, you could get more information. So definitely targeting both, retail endemic and non-endemic advertisers there. What else? They talked about AWS, obviously, and investments. AWS now has an annualized run rate of 115 billion. They, much like Meta and Microsoft and Google, talked about, I think, still in some senses being supply limited, capacity limited in terms of their AI services. And so that was where we got into the sort of 26.3 billion in CapEx for Q4. And they said that was the sort of rate that we should expect for the rest of 2025, which would put it over $100 billion in terms of CapEx investment from Amazon. So I think I had said somewhere in the 90s, so that was even a little bit low. But the management talked about being driven by the demand signals they have today and the once in a lifetime opportunity AI represents. So again, that sense that you don't want to be left out or left behind in sort of the race into this industry. I mean, that's quite a bit of investment now across these 4 tech companies. Jeff, Nidhi, I mean, does that feel warranted? I think the investors are pretty much now just figuring that's what it's going to be.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. I think, I think it does feel warranted, but obviously with the recent news of DeepSeek, I think that's, spooked some of the investors as well. So we'll see how this plays out, but it is a lot of money to invest.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's kind of the size of market caps for some other kind of sectors and companies, and but definitely makes kind of sense as we enter, and there's so much innovation left in the space.
Yep. We also had earnings from some of the largest TV media owners. Jeff, talk us through what that looked like this week.
Yeah, so we started off the week with Fox reporting earnings, which were really strong. Revenue jumped 20% to a little over 5 billion, beating projections, and ad sales on the quarter was up about 20% to $2.4 billion. So a couple of interesting takeaways from the call: that Fox is betting on a dual strategy, maintaining a strong cable business, while also dipping their toes into direct-to-consumer streaming. So it's a little bit of a change in strategy for them. I'll have a little bit more on that in a second. And also advertising remains a huge driver for Fox, both on traditional TV and in streaming, meaning basically Tubi. So again, elections, politics, sports were main contributors to the strong performance. I found a very interesting data point that was revealed, that the political revenue generated from July through December for Fox was $400 million during the election, which was a record for them. So that was an interesting one, just to give you a scope and size of the market. And Tubi was also a very strong contributor as well. And
we don't always get that specific from the big broadcasters. We get a pretty good sense usually from, like I mentioned last week, the sort of local station owners. But yeah, that's a big number, and probably at the high end versus what we would expect to see from any other major broadcasters, CBS, ABC, and NBC, partially on affiliate stations owned, right? And then also, as we were talking about this week, you mentioned, of course, Fox News as well.
Yeah, no, I agree, because when you look at it, probably the bulk of that advertising was coming from the local affiliates. Not as much national advertising was done. But again, this election was pretty unique with the candidates not being known until pretty late in the race. So there was probably a little bit more action on the national side than would probably be expected in a more traditional election cycle. And then the other thing that was pretty interesting was that they announced that they're going to be doing a direct-to-consumer streaming product. So this was pretty much news to everyone. There hadn't been too much rumblings about this. It's still very unclear what this offering will be, but it will include both entertainment, sports, and news as well. So no word on pricing. It is supposed to launch later in this year, so we'll be interested to see what that comes out at. And they did say that it is targeted for people who have cut both cord nevers and cord cutters. So that should give you an idea of sort of like what it will look like. And it's interesting, since the demise of Venue a few months ago.
Yeah, I was just going to ask, do we think, does this not happen if Venue had gone ahead?
That would be my guess. And I think, also having all the technology developed and pretty much ready to go, I think this could be, perhaps a way to repurpose some of that investment. But yeah, we'll see.
Well, this is the other thing, and you and I discussed this briefly, but I think would be interested in your point of view here, because for me, adding a separate app just adds so much more complexity. Then you have to, divert your marketing messages to download 2 different apps and get people to sign up. To me, it feels like it would make more sense just to add paid content on Tubi. Do we have a sense of what route they're going?
I think that's a very real possibility. We don't. They were pretty cagey on releasing any details, but I think that would make sense, and that was pretty much fit into the strategy that they've been doing on the streaming side. And also, speaking of Tubi, there was a little bit of some insights given on the Tubi's profitability. I'll get the quote up here from Lachlan. He said, "On Tubi, our investment has reduced this year as the business continues to scale and really generate very positive advertising growth. We'll see that we'll continue to invest in Tubi throughout this year and next before it reaches profitability." So kind of an insight that, still probably has a few more years to go before it reaches profitability.
Yeah, and our estimates are saying that this is the first year to be past $1 billion in ad revenue, right? Or right. 2020 this year, 2024.
2024, correct, yeah.
All right, let's talk Mouse House.
Yeah, the mouse reported. So yeah, a little bit of a mixed earnings for Disney. Overall, pretty strong. Total revenue was up about 5% to about 24.7 billion. Obviously, having a hit like Moana 2 definitely helps on the studio side. Again, a couple of very interesting things I think that came out in the especially in the Q&A session was that linear networks remain valuable, but there's a big but there. So the quote was from Iger, I won't rule out the possibility of the smaller networks in some form or another being configured differently in terms of how we bring them to market, or maybe even ownership, but not right now. So my take on that is like, we're not selling, but if you call me, I'll definitely take that phone call.
Yeah, everyone's trying to figure out how to maintain the revenue, right? I mean, even with sports for Disney, like the affiliate revenue is over 2 billion. The streaming revenue is 400 million. Like it's more than 400, but still, that's a big divergence between what they're still pulling out of cable and pay TV.
Exactly.
What
And
they're getting
ESPN
directly.
has always traditionally had one of the probably the highest carriage fee in all of cable television for quite some time. So that generates a substantial amount of revenue for them. So yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how the new ESPN streaming service fits into everything. But speaking of streaming, Disney also did reveal that they achieved profitability despite a 1% decline in Disney Plus subscribers. So Disney Plus subscribers grew about 1%. Well, international subscriptions fell by roughly 2%, so resulting in a total of about 124.6 million Disney Plus subscribers, which was down from 125.3 million. So a little bit of a mixed bag, but it was profitable. Disney Plus, Hulu, and ESPN Plus brought in a $293 million profit during the last quarter. So it's the second profitable quarter in a row for them.
Progress.
Yeah, slowly but surely. And then one final point on Disney on the earnings that I thought was pretty interesting. They did announce that they're going to lower their content spending projection for this upcoming fiscal year to 23 billion, down from an earlier estimate of 24 billion. And just to give you a reference, in fiscal year 2024, they spent about 23.4 billion. And the takeaway was that management said they want to emphasize efficient content spending. So read into that as you may.
Yeah, well, they've been towards the very top of our list of content spenders across, folks like YouTube and Amazon climbing the ranks as well. Interesting that Netflix, we covered earlier, had announced a 1% or not 1%, a $1 billion increase. So going the other direction. So maybe those things start to come closer together.
Yeah, exactly. And, I think as you see, especially on scripted content, shows are expensive to produce for that level of quality for streaming. So we'll see how that all factors into. And then on the last one, we had BCE earnings. So it was a strong finish to the end of 2024 for them. They beat expectations with about a 3.5% revenue jump to about 6.4 billion. But despite the strong finish, they're projecting a more challenging 2025. So they anticipate revenue to go down between 1 and 5%. So they said that there's these strong economic headwinds, including higher interest rates, inflation, and competition in the telecom market, will all be challenges for this upcoming year. So I think again shows in telecom, it's a market that's just struggling for growth.
We also had a few other digital players announced. So we had Pinterest. They announced 18% constant currency revenue growth in the quarter, 19% for the year, up to 3.6 billion. Very exciting. That puts them into our top 25 list now, I believe. They were sort of hovering right there just under the cutoff. So yay, congratulations. It was their first $1 billion revenue quarter, they said, and a record 553 million monthly active users. So we'll continue to watch that one. Spotify as well, Q4 advertising revenue growth of 6% constant currency to 557 million. In 2024, full year advertising revenue of 1.9 billion, up 10.5% in constant currency terms. Those are in euros, actually. So just a quick note, euros there, 1.9 billion, so over 2 billion, or just about. The euro conversion is roughly on parity now. So close to $2 billion in US dollars. They did mention lower marketing costs in the quarter in Q4. And that's been a trend over a couple of quarters as they look into efficiency and improving margin there. And then they had a few points about rolling out their creator program, Spotify for Creators, and a partner program to create new monetization opportunities for creators. And also the note that they've paid out $10 billion in royalties to the music industry in 2024. So we talk about content costs. Their music only is $10 billion. So another comparison note. And then ad-supported revenue, they said both music and podcast advertising was driven by growth in impressions sold, partially offset by softness in pricing. Our automated sales channels were the largest contributors to overall advertising growth. And this is something that we've talked about in this year, next year, and in our commentary for quite a long time, is that some of the strength of Google and Meta in terms of offering self-service platforms for advertisers, being able to automate that, certainly looks like it's unlocked some growth for Spotify as well. It's been an area of increasing focus for Snap. Also, they reported this week, Snapchat Plus subscription revenue grew 131% to an annualized revenue run rate well over 500 million. It's a positive story in terms of their diversification beyond advertising revenue into subscriptions. On this point about sort of smaller, medium-sized businesses using the platform to advertise, SMBs were the largest contributor to ad revenue growth in 2024. So interesting results there as well. I was looking at their advertising spend. So looking at them as an advertiser, somewhat anemic. It's currently 1.1% of revenue, less than 60 million. So for the year, which is, like even lower than our financial services composite and significantly lower than what we would see for an entertainment category, which is closer to 6% or just above. So interesting, something I think to keep an eye on as they look to expand their position and ranking in terms of media owners as well. Whew, that was just the media owners. Let's shift and talk about e-commerce. Obviously, these retailers and especially Asia-based retailers have been sources of growth for pretty much all of the companies that we just talked about. Well, more so the digital, less so TV. But Nidhi, you noted news this week from India.
Yeah, it was quite interesting to see the shift in partnership for Shein towards India, nearly 5 years after being banned in India. Shein, the Chinese e-commerce app, is making a re-entry through a licensing deal with Reliance, and tapping on kind of the growing consumer base there, which is interesting. I think the arrangement as well, it kind of requires all the customer data to be stored in India, and it will be fully controlled by Reliance. So Shein will have no access rights and kind of the technological partner in the space, and all the products are expected to be kind of designed and manufacturing locally, which is interesting.
Yeah, I mean, Shein was in the news in the US this week as well. We had the announcement that the de minimis exemptions for low-value goods coming to the US is going to be revoked. The US Postal Service temporarily said they were going to stop accepting shipments, I believe, that were in that category, and then reversed that announcement within less than a day. So again, it's been a very busy news week. But that is going to impact certainly not just the Asia-based retailers like Shein and Temu, but also catching up some of the smaller e-commerce retailers based in the US, but that still import goods from either China or via Mexico and other countries. So Lots of fallout still to come from that as well. Let's switch gears. Let's look at the buying side of the advertising picture. Let's talk about some of the largest brand advertisers that reported this week as well. And we'll start in with luxury.
Yeah, so luxury sector continues to kind of see that uneven recovery this week. We had the likes of Capri and Estee Lauder kind of reporting decline in the fourth quarter when it came to their revenues. I think Estee Lauder particularly mentioned the challenges the business was having, particularly in the Asia retail travel business and the subdued consumer sentiment in China, and more outlining the outlook for the quarter ahead to be soft, which kind of aligns to what we've been saying, this idea of a gradual recovery in China this year for the sector. On the other side, we had L'Oreal Luxe and Tapestry report positive organic growth. L'Oreal Luxe about 1% compared to Tapestry, which reported 5% growth this year. Tapestry was an interesting one. They raised their 2025 guidance for the fiscal year, implying about a 3% growth, which I think will be kind of the norm for the luxury sector this year.
I think we've got a fairly good picture now with a lot of those the largest companies having reported in that luxury sector, right? So yeah, it's normalizing off of very, very fast growth over the last couple of years. CPG companies reported as well. Some of the largest we had, I think it's actually the prior week, but we hadn't covered it. Colgate-Palmolive. For the full year, net sales grew 3.3% as reported, or 7.4% for organic sales growth, with growth occurring in every division and in all 4 of our categories. They mentioned, and this is a quote, "Our strong margin performance allowed us to continue to invest to drive brand health and support innovation, with a 15% increase in advertising spending in 2024, following a 19% increase in 2023. We've built flexibility into our income statement so that we can continue to invest in scaling our capabilities in key areas like digital and data and analytics across the organization to accelerate change and build competitive advantages while delivering bottom line growth." So I think, consistently following that trajectory of CPG companies looking at marketing increasingly as a growth driver, and looking to support what their outlook is for 2025, which is that 3 to 5%. So kind of going back to what was a historical, again, mid-single digit growth rate for CPG leading up to the pandemic. Pepsi announced organic growth of 2.1% for the fourth quarter and 2% for the full year, looking to fund disciplined commercial investments, a little bit less exuberant, I think, about marketing growth there. And they expect to continue to deliver low single-digit organic revenue growth for 2025. Although they did note that advertising and marketing increased across Europe, APAC, AU&Z, and China. Kind of mixed, I think, as they're looking to support volume growth in a recovery for PepsiCo. Mondelez talked about continuing to execute against a long-term growth strategy. Their growth was still pretty heavily pricing driven. So looking, I think, there to see volume growth in 25. They're expecting organic net revenue growth in 25 to be approximately 5%, again, mid-single digit range. North America growth was slower for the company, and versus LATAM, Europe, and EMEA, Asia, Middle East, and Africa all growing better. And advertising and consumer promotions were up high single digits, they said, so for the year. Goodness, the list this week, I can't get over how busy this week was. Clorox announced organic sales decline of 9%, lapping inventory impacts from a cyber attack in 23 and the divestitures of Argentina and vitamin businesses. So, looks, I think, worse given comparables there. Again, expecting 2025 organic sales to be up 3 to 5%. They mentioned advertising and sales promotion spending still expected to be sort of 11 to 11.5% of net sales, reflecting the company's ongoing commitment to invest behind its brands. And that was $832 million in spending through the fiscal year ended June, which was up 13.4% versus the prior year. So, and then Diageo reported first half results, organic net sales growth of 1%, despite a challenging industry backdrop as consumers continue to navigate through inflationary pressures they mentioned. Whew.
Quite a list.
I know. Earnings season is always so much fun. Let's dig into a couple of the digital endemics, and then we'll wrap it up and talk about what we're looking forward to next week.
Yeah, so just to add on to the few of the many results we discussed on the podcast today, we had PayPal and Uber report this week, part of our digital endemics segment, primarily businesses operating online. And PayPal and Uber both reported strong results. PayPal had net revenues grow by 7%. And mentioned about total payment volumes growing by 10%, indicating a kind of a healthy spending environment as it stands. This kind of echoes the trends we've seen amongst some other financial services companies within our composite, such as Visa and MasterCard, who reported last week, also showing strong payment volumes and indicative of kind of that healthy environment when it comes to spending. One of the things that they mentioned about as they look into 2025, and something we've kind of been hearing amongst other earnings as well of other companies, is the focus on scaling and striking more partnerships and prioritizing the use of AI. They also particularly mentioned about increasing marketing spend for 2025. So currently, as they stand, they're about 1.8% of total revenue is spent on advertising. This is typically lower than what this category of digital endemics spends. And I think if we look at advertising for acquiring new customers and getting scale, it's likely to be that kind of important area. And Uber reported 19% constant currency revenue growth. Interesting bit here is that freight has been struggling, but delivery and the mobility business has been recording double-digit growth in 2024. We've seen this kind of trend of services boom, particularly post-COVID, and this has continued last year as well. And the company mentioned when it came to outlook about a high teen digit growth to continue in gross bookings for this year, but expecting FX to be kind of a headwind when it comes to the quarters coming.
Great. Yeah, it almost looks to be sort of a battle of the mobility players in the Super Bowl this year. Lots of DoorDash spots, lots of Uber spots. So maybe we'll hear more about some of the output from that when we get DoorDash results next week. We also have a couple more CPG companies plus Airbnb. Coca-Cola reports next week, Kellogg. So lots more to be covering, although maybe hopefully not quite as busy as this week. Anyone else looking forward to something this weekend or over next week? I think we've had our reign here on the West Coast. I think it's headed your way, Jeff, and then possibly to you, Nidhi.
Should be a very wet weekend here, but which should bode well for Super Bowl viewership as more people stay inside. So I think this should be probably one of the highest rated Super Bowls ever.
Well, it's tough to beat last year, right? That was the record last year. So we'll see if they build on it again.
Exactly. But I think when you factor in streaming this year, so I think we might be heading towards it. But again, it will depend on the quality of the game. If the game isn't very good, then my prediction will go out the window.
I think there's been lots of talking up of the halftime show too. So yeah. All right. Well, we'll convene and discuss all of that when we get together again next week. Until then, thanks for listening. This Week, Next Week is a podcast from GroupM. All information is provided for informational and entertainment purposes and should not be taken as financial advice. If you have questions or suggestions for a future episode, please email business.intelligence@groupm.com.